Algebra 2. So today we are going to, again, continue our study of completing the square. Okay, so if we refer back to what we were doing yesterday with our notes. Okay, so our steps for completing the square. Step number 1 is get the x squared and the x terms on one side, which is the left of the equation, and put the constant on the other, which is the right side, and leave a space after the x term. So again, it looks like this. Next, adjust if your lead coefficient is not 1. So again, divide if your lead coefficient is, for example, 4. Divide every term by 4 so that it turns into a 1. Okay. Next, step 3, calculate your b divided by 2 squared. That's your, you're completing the perfect square trinomial. And again, whatever you do to one side, you have to do the other, so you have to add it to both sides. Step number 4, you factor and simplify. Step number 5, you take the square root of both sides, and again, don't forget the plus or minus. And then step number 6, you solve for x. Again, you should have 2 answers. Okay, so working it out here. We're going to try some more problems today. The difference, for the most part, between yesterday's and today's is these probably are not going to work out as nice. Okay, so I've highlighted 4 to go through together. So let's see how this goes here. So the first equation we have is r squared minus 2r plus 96 equals 0. So the first step is to put the x squared and the x terms on one side and move everything else over. So we're going to have r squared minus 2r. We're going to leave a space equals, and then to move this 96 over, we have to subtract it from both sides. And 0 minus 96 is negative 96. Okay, step number 2, we are going to complete the square. Because my lead coefficient on here is 1, so I don't need to adjust with that step. So my b term, my b coefficient is negative 2. If I divide that by 2, that's negative 1. And when I square negative 1, that becomes a positive 1. So we're going to add 1 to both sides. So I'm going to factor and simplify. So on the left side, we can factor this into r minus 1 quantity squared. On the right side, we have negative 96 plus 1 is negative 95. Okay, so next, we're going to take the square root of both sides. So we're going to have r minus 1 equals plus or minus. Now, thinking back as an Algebra 1 student, you can't have the square root of a negative number. But remember, again, we know that I is the square root of negative 1. Okay, so if we think about the square root of negative 95, this becomes I root 95. So this is an imaginary solution. Okay, it's not real, it's going to be imaginary. And if I think about reducing 95 for that matter as well, 95 does not have any factors that are perfect squares, so we're going to keep it like this. Okay, so next, if I'm going to solve for r, I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So r is going to be 1 plus or minus I root 95. And this is my answer. Now remember what this really means. I do have 2 answers here. This is like saying r equals 1 plus I root 95. The other option is that this is 1 minus I root 95. So it is not wrong if you want to write it out in 2 pieces. I'm okay with that. But you're going to notice that I write it as 1. 1 plus or minus I root 95. Okay, so again, you can see that the first one especially is not working out as nice as it did yesterday. So again, these are the ones we might have fractions, we might have radicals, we might have imaginaries, or maybe it's a nice one anyway in the mix. Okay, so let's take a look at this next one. So we have 4p squared minus 8p minus 12 equals 0. So step number 1 is to get the squared, the p squared in this case, and the p term on a side by themselves. So we're going to have 4p squared plus 8p, and then we're going to shift the 12 over. To do that, we have to add 12 to both sides. So 0 plus 12 is 12. Okay, now next. We can't have a lead coefficient other than 1, so we can divide each term by, in this case, 4. So again, if we divide everything by 4, we're going to have p squared plus 2p equals 3. Okay, now to continue going here. So to figure out, to complete the square here, we're going to take 2, the middle, the b value, divided by 2, and square it. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. So if we add 1 to this side, we're going to add 1 to that side as well. So this factors into p plus 1 quantity squared equals 3 plus 1 is 4. So this one is back to one that works out nice. So to solve, we're going to take the square root of both sides. So p plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 4 is 2. So now I have two options. Either p plus 1 equals positive 2 or p plus 1 equals negative 2. In the first case, if I subtract 1 from both sides, p is going to be 1. In the second case, if I subtract 1 from each side, p is going to be negative 3. Okay, so let's continue on. The next one that I highlighted is this one. X squared plus 5x plus 4 equals 0. So again, we need to get the x squared and the x term on a side by themselves. Okay, so we're going to have x squared plus 5x, I'm going to leave a space, equals, if I subtract 4 from both sides, that's negative 4. Okay, so this one, again, done on purpose to have fractions. So if I take my b value, which is 5, if I divide it by 2, and then I square it. So 5 divided by 2 can't really happen. We're going to keep it as a fraction, 5 halves. So when I square it, I have to square both the top and the bottom. So we're going to have 25 over 4. So if I add it to the left, I have to add it to the right. Okay, so we're going to factor and simplify. So the left side will factor into x plus 5 halves squared. And then on the right side, if you're going to do it out by hand, negative 4 with a denominator of 4 is the same thing as saying negative 16 over 4. If I shift down, make sure we can see that on the screen. So now that they have a common denominator, we're going to add the numerators. So negative 16 and a positive 25 give me 9, and then again it's over 4. So what I'm going to do next is take the square root of both sides. So we're going to have x plus 5 halves equals plus or minus, and we can do this. The square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of 4 is 2. So now we're going to go to the splits. We got two possibilities. We're going to have x plus 5 halves equals 3 halves, or we're going to have x plus 5 halves equals negative 3 halves. So on the left part, if I subtract 5 halves from both sides, that's going to be negative 2 halves, which is the same thing as negative 1. On the right side, if I subtract 5 halves from both sides, that's going to be negative 8 halves, which reduces to negative 4. So my answers are going to be x equals negative 1 or x equals negative 4. Okay, and I had one more plan to go through here with you. So this one kind of jumbled there, but it says 5x squared minus 13x plus 6 equals 0. So again, what I need to do first is put the x squared and the x terms on a side by themselves. So we are going to have 5x squared minus 13x, and then we're going to shift the 6 over. We're going to leave a space there. But again, that becomes a negative 6. Okay, next step. We cannot have a lead coefficient of a 5, so we have to divide each term by 5. So we're going to have x squared minus 13 fifths x equals negative 6 fifths. Okay, so you can see this one's kind of getting ugly, but again, we can work it out here. So to figure out to complete the square here, to figure out my perfect square trinomial to adjust, I'm going to take my b value, I'm going to work it out over here on the right, which is negative 13 fifths. I have to divide it by 2 and then square it. Okay, so remember when you divide it by 2, it's the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So this is the same thing as saying negative 13 fifths times, well, what's the reciprocal of 2? 1/2. And again, I need to square it. So if I multiply that across the top and across the bottom, that's negative 13 tenths. Again, I got to square it. So that becomes 169 over 100. So I'm going to add 169 over 100 to both sides. Again, whatever I do to the left, I have to do to the right. So next, again, we're going to factor and simplify. So the left is going to become x, again, there's a minus in the middle, and it's going to be 13 over 10 squared. And then on the right, well, we got to have a common denominator. So negative 6/5, again, we got to have a common denominator of 100. To get from 5 to 100, we're going to multiply by 20. So negative 6 times 20 is negative 120. So now if I combine the negative 120 over 100 and 169 over 100, that's going to give me, it looks like 49 over 100. So that's not so bad. So now we're going to take the square root of both sides. So we're going to have x minus 13/10 equals plus or minus. The square root of 49 is 7. The square root of 100 is 10. And then now we're going to do the splits. We have two options. X minus 13/10 equals 7/10, or x minus 13/10 equals negative 7/10. So I'm just going to cross this out so we have some space here. On the left, if we add 13/10 to both sides, that's going to be 20/10, which is 2. The other option is if I, again, add 13/10 to both sides. Let's see here. That gives me 6/10, which 6/10 will reduce to 3/5. So my final answer is going to be x equals 2 or x equals 3/5. And again, that's it for my examples today. As always, if you have questions, please let me know.